Welcome everyone to the second installment of the Fintech Talk series hosted by Fintech Sandbox. I'm Michał Kaczmarski, America's Fintech lead at Invest Hong Kong, and I'm excited to introduce the final session for the week, when 5G, edge computing, and Fintech collide, generating real data advantages for financial services. When thinking about the theme for this week's events, the role of ensuring global inclusive growth, I would say that Hong Kong places great importance to everyone having access to efficient, inexpensive, and seamless financial services. And technology plays a huge role in that, as currently 67% of consumers in Hong Kong actively use fintech services. The topic of big data and mobile data is an essential part of that conversation because vast amounts of data are generated every second in countless interactions with banks, government, and e-commerce. And to that end, 5G is currently rolling out in Hong Kong, and mobile phone penetration is among the highest in the world. This afternoon's topic is especially meaningful to us because of the work that Invest Hong Kong is doing to bring together technology, global digital data, and financial services by promoting and ensuring the development of Hong Kong fintech ecosystem, where there are now more than 600 fintech companies, with 1 in 3 fintech company founders in Hong Kong coming from overseas. And since this is the last fintech session for the week, we wanted to say thank you for joining us. We know everyone is pulled in a lot of different directions these days, so we really appreciate everyone being a part of the great conversations this week on building global inclusive growth. And with that, I'm happy to welcome Fintech Sandbox co-founder Sarah Biller to get us started. Hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Michelle, again. I'll make sure I say that thanks again. And reminder that we're truly in a moment of global advancement and innovation in fintech. I am truly flattered to be here today with our 3 panelists. We contemplated this panel knowing that as we left this week's discussions on how to truly build a global, inclusive financial services sector, that we really needed to understand and unpack the opportunities that are presented when we intersect data with machines and with communities and people who will be influenced and hopefully better served by the capabilities of the individuals who are on this call. And so I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this session, and I'm certainly honored to be joined by panelists who are at the forefront of these ideas. What we thought we'd do today is a 3-part discussion. 1, after introductions, let me say 1, we're going to talk about where we are in this new state of advancing technologies. 2, we'll dive into questions around the application of the intersection in tech and advanced thinking around how we're building the next new economy. And then we'll end up with a series of questions around projecting the next future state of innovation in financial services. We'll welcome your questions at the end and appreciate you putting them in the Q&A box. But without going any further, let me ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Mohammed, would you please start and share with us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me for this panel discussion. I apologize because of some technical difficulties. I won't be able to come on the camera, but here we are. So thank you, attendees and the panel team, for this exciting discussion, the possibilities that 5G and edge computing is going to bring to the fintech world and other industries. With that, my name is Mohammed Zulkarnain. I have been in the industry for more than 20 years. I have been dealing with large enterprises, mostly in financial vertical, and I lead a team of solution architects in the signature segment for 5G and enterprise business unit of Verizon Business Group. It has been an exciting journey to witness and be part of it as to how technology advancements they are driving the adoption of social, mobile, and cloud in all the industries, let alone financial verticals. And now 5G and MEC combined, they are bringing so much disruption and economic possibilities. Recently, I've been involved in the journey of 5G and mobile edge computing as part of Verizon MEC ambassador community, where we are driving discussions with our clients, including financials, and explore the art of possibilities with the 5G and MEC. Some of the exciting activities that I've been involved is leveraging 5G Labs from Verizon, and we have innovation hubs for our clients, for academia and startups to bring the programs like innovation challenges, ideation and incubation, and 5G hackathon. And the purpose of these things is really to provide the tools, which are very complex and expensive, to our partners, the Verizon platform, and bring partner ecosystem together with a potential outcome, inspiring and educating about 5G future, explore and validate 5G use cases, and development of real 5G experiences. So the way I take it, it's a sport, team sport, right? Where the application developers, the cloud providers, the service providers, they are coming together and bring the innovation.
Mohammed, thank you so much. We're really flattered to have you here to help us contemplate 5G and learn about what we've all heard about so much and what it means to financial services. Sandy, may I go to you next to share a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name's Alex Pendlet. Everybody calls me Sandy. I'm faculty at MIT, helped create the Media Lab, which you probably have heard of, and run a group called Connection Science, which not only looks at data analytics, privacy, proprietary, but how we can make data much more liquid and how we can build much more secure sorts of systems with this. And we are sponsored by countries ranging from Australia to Switzerland, financial institutions such as MasterCard, Ernst & Young, some of the major banks. Recently, we helped Fidelity and the major US banks spin up Akoya, which is basically a sort of a model of one of our sort of level 1 platforms. And we just helped Switzerland spin up a fully encrypted digital platform for all digital assets. It's called Swiss Trust Chain. So it's a little bit like the sort of Ethereum or Bitcoin, but done by the Swiss. So it works, it's efficient, you can count on it. And that was in conjunction with Swisscom, Swiss Post, and the Swiss Stock Exchange. And now we're beginning to work with other entities around the world to spin up central bank digital currencies and other things which are direct disruptors of the financial areas.
Sandy, thank you. We're very honored to have your global perspective as well as what it means too on the localized level. Umer, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. First of all, I must say that I'm honored to be in the auspicious company of Sandy and Mohammed and Sarah Yu, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Umu Chaudhary. I lead the 5G Edge Cloud portfolio and also the network equipment providers portfolio within AWS Telecom segment. I've spent most of my life within telecom. So of course, like 5G is an integral part of it. And I've been very fortunate to be part of the journey where when AWS really started to think and create a vision of like, how can we solve some of the problems that will arise with 5G as well as like some of the opportunities that 5G will provide. And how can we actually create value there for our end customers, right? And our partners, which are, of course, the Verizons and other CSPs. I've also been very fortunate in being part of the 4 publicly announced 5G Edge Cloud partnerships with Verizon, Vodafone, KDDI, and SKT, and really looking forward to have a very good, energetic discussion that should definitely bring some innovation juices, and then we can think about like how do we really take this opportunity forward. Thank you.
Umer, thank you. I can't imagine how we'd unpack the question of building this global, inclusive financial services sector that we've referenced a couple of times already without the three of you on the call and the applications of the technology and the thinking you're doing. I thought we might really transition quickly just to ground all the listeners. I just got a note. We had over 500 RSVPs for this. No one be nervous, but we're happy to have everyone in thinking about really what is the technology. Mohammed, I'd like to turn it to you first to talk to us about really what is 5G. Umer, we'll go to you about MEC, and then Sandy, really given the breadth of your experiences and your thinking and what you just talked about, this idea of liquid data, what it all means. But Mohammed, let's go back to you. What is 5G?
Thanks, Sarah. So when I think about 5G, it's the way I think it's going to change the way we live, learn, interact with each other, and consume services. It's truly a fourth industrial revolution. And how is it making it happen? As Umar just said, there are capabilities that are married with 5G. From the mobile edge computing, and we will be digging a little bit deeper. But right now, I just want to talk a little bit about 5G. What are the things that make it really different? The thing that makes 5G networks so special compared to previous cellular networks is really the 8 currencies, we call them in Verizon world, many of which are fully realized when using mobile edge computing. The 3 most important that I would cite here is really high bandwidth and the low latency, which we call ultra low latency also, and the dense connection. And what I mean by dense connection, number of devices. Imagine that everything is going to be connected to everything else, and they will be generating data, and they will be moving from one place to another place. The speed is going to be high. So the mobility that provides 500 kilometers per hour with a density of devices with a potential of 1 million per kilometer square. Imagine the latencies going down from 30 to 40 milliseconds to maybe 10 milliseconds or under, right? And the data volume, the potential to actually, leverage 10 terabits per second per kilometer square. So when Sandy talked about his democratization of the information and things like these things are going to be humongous in that. And the underlying fabric from Verizon perspective, when we think about 5G for the future, right, fiber is one of the most important things, which we have embarked on that journey for last 5 years that we have put together nationwide, and that's going to light the infrastructure that is going to fuel the capabilities for 5G, right? And then the second thing is the spectrum, and spectrum is really an important asset. We have been a leader, from copper wire to, I would say, 4G and now 5G, the first to bring these capabilities to the world, right? And so from a spectrum perspective, we have nationwide, we have millimeter wave, which are for metro areas or highly dense population. And now there is a recent announcement which actually came with the C-band, and that's going to be mid-band frequency, which are really precious and going to give capabilities to the suburb in larger cities. And that's going to fuel those 3 things that I just talked about, the high bandwidth, the ultra low latencies, and we will talk how these things are going to impact the application development, the ecosystem of various services to actually bring products and services that are very innovative to the end user.
Mohammed, thank you. You can envision the capabilities you just described, the ability to capture, with latency, with low latency, these digital little breadcrumbs everyone is leaving behind or that institutions might use. And on the other side of that, Umer, is the capabilities that you began to describe at AWS around MEC. Can you share with us that other side of this important innovation?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much, Mohammed, for so crisply putting the 5G value proposition and the immense possibilities that it brings. Now, one of the things that is really an outcome of it, which 5G enables us to do, is to process the data closer to the consumer, preferably at the edge of the network. And that is what is called mobile edge computing, multi-access edge computing, or MEC. Generally, there are different terminologies which are used. Now, at AWS, we really see this as a cloud continuum. And that's why we have a unique value proposition and a very distinct value proposition of offering edge cloud to our customers that goes beyond the edge computing. And that means offering those AWS cloud services closer to consumer as well as enterprises. Now, we also believe in building products by working backwards from the customer requirements. And our customers, that is two sets of customers, right? One set of customers are the builders, the developers, and the ISVs. And then the end customers, who are the consumers and especially the enterprise customers. They've been telling us that they would like to use AWS cloud services much closer to their location so that they can unblock new use cases that require lower latency, conserving huge data transfer, and also the data residency. So pretty much like the currencies that Mohammed was talking about. And that's why our edge cloud strategy revolves around providing the same user experience to our customers as they would get in the cloud. And that's a fundamental part of it. So as part of this whole cloud continuum, I'll mention three unique edge offerings that we are bringing to the market, or we have brought to the market. Number one is AWS Outpost. That offers AWS services at the extreme edge, that is the customer premises. The second is AWS Wavelength Zones. That provides AWS cloud services of compute, storage, security, containers, etc. at the 5G edge network locations, and then reaching the end consumers via 5G. And then the third offering is AWS local zones, which are the extensions of existing AWS availability zones and regions in large population areas near the IT centers and industrial zones as well. So pretty much the theme is that it is not about providing cloud-like services. It is actually offering cloud services at the edge.
Umer, thank you for that, because you've both just described a vision I think, Sandy, you've thought about for a long time, and that's where this dynamic collection of data, the richness and robustness, meets the computing capabilities. I wonder if you might talk about sort of your framing of this discussion and what it means really about organizing the data, what it might mean to communities, how we think about it as financial services entrepreneurs.
Sure. Let me give you the sort of 40,000 foot, maybe 100,000 foot version of this. So we just heard about 5G and cloud and edge computing. So one of the things that's happening is as more devices get out there, 5G is part of the more devices getting out there, the attack surface for cyber attack goes up by, it's anticipated a factor of 10 in the next, say, decade, which means that the things that you've seen so far with security are just the beginning. Right? They're going to get a lot worse. So what do you do about that? Well, edge computing is part of the answer, because you don't move data until you've done a lot of the pre-processing. You don't create data lakes. What you do is you have federated learning. And it's really interesting that, for instance, Google just announced that they're moving all of their services for advertising to this thing called Flock, which is a federated learning mechanism. And part of that is to reduce the attack surface. One of the things that happens when you do this edge computing that's interesting is you suddenly have a much clearer idea of where data is going and what it's being used for. So we talk about hardware-defined networks, software-defined networks. Suddenly we have data-defined networks because the data is moving from the edge to the center and back, and you can keep track of it much better. For auditing, it means you can detect cyber attacks much, much more quickly. It means actually you can look at the health of the ecosystem for things like fraud and other sorts of things much more easily. People like Ernst & Young and the bank, the World Bank and tax authorities are interested because you can actually monitor things in ways you weren't able to do before. And what that all does is that gives you much better control of data, much more visibility, because you have streams that are encrypted streams, of course, coming from all over, and you can tap into them to be able to look for patterns. And so the top level thing is that, you know, we think of the internet as a communication medium, but it's actually pretty terrible for business. You don't get an absolute resolution of whether your message got there. It's often not legally enforceable. You have data localization rules. You have all sorts of things that make it really tough to use for business. And what we're seeing is an evolution to a transaction medium. And so that comes with edge computing. So with the internet, the smarts are at the edge. And that's what's happening with this new sort of notion of having data that you can audit continually, which incidentally is required by GDPR. And by having that sort of structure of edge and center. And this is the sort of thing that certain countries, China for one, Switzerland for another, Singapore for another, have gotten ahead of. And they've said, well, look, if we're going to have a fully encrypted edge network, right, with all of these streams, medical data, financial data, other sort of data, then why don't we make a uniform transaction platform that has the ability to really get business done? And so China has their Digital One and their Digital Smart City. We just helped Switzerland spin up the Swiss TrustNet, which is intended to do the same thing. We work with Singapore with their thing, which is called Project Ubin, not the sexiest name, but there you go. But it's intended not only for financial transactions, and often they come along with a central bank currency, digital central bank currency, but it's intended for logistics chains, for payments, for smart contracts, which are legally enforceable. And I think that is going to be a huge transformation in the fintech area, as well as all the sort of adjacent areas that are basically about exchange. The final thing, sorry to go on so long, but the final thing that I see is the evolution in this type of thinking of data exchanges. So we work with several in Southeast Asia, in other places, where data owners don't share their data except with a broker who is obligated to and has obligated to enforce privacy, proprietary security. And they don't share the data either, but what they host is they host queries. So you share insights, you don't share data. And you do that through these data brokers. And in fact, we've worked with the EU, and this is part of their proposed 2021 regulations, is that you don't share data, you share insights, and you do it through data brokers, which have a fiduciary responsibility to the data owners. Interestingly, the California law has the same sort of mechanism built into it, and people are beginning to jump on that to make it happen. So get ready.
Sandy, you've just painted a really exciting moment for all. I can imagine the entrepreneurs, I know as one myself, Thinking about what the future holds and what you've just explained is here now. Why don't we kind of bring it back actually on this idea? It is building a new intersection, and we titled this section a little bit of like kind of thinking about the new economy, which you've just talked about in many ways. Mohammed, can you help us why don't you help us think about some use cases that you're seeing too in financial services? Really pick up on Sandy's just that thread of really incredible, innovative ideas that are going on because we have now new data, we have 5G, and we have Mac. Mohammed, can you help us?
Yes, Sarah, thank you. And Sandy, thank you for giving that really great insight into how the information is distributed, different information types, they are interacting with each other. And, the thing that we just talked, Umar and I, when it comes to 5G and mobile edge computer, how these information can be decentralized and if the application developers dream and congregate these things, the end user experience, how it can be enhanced. And we will unpack that a little bit as we go forward, right? So, but if you look at the last 10 years, right, what's happening in the industry, cloud became big, social became big, and then mobile adoption became big, right? And so, a lot of businesses, they have business capabilities that can be done, from your end device, whether you are sitting at home or you are riding a train or even flying in the sky, right? So, but the differentiator, one of the differentiator is hey, how fast and reliably I'm consuming those services, and how am I feeling when I'm consuming those services, right? With what Sandy said, these are a lot of good capabilities, but they also open the threat and vulnerability surface, right? So one of the challenge that, providers, business providers or innovators or entrepreneurs, they face is how to ensure to provide secure, reliable, and policy-compliant connections across this increased threat surface, right? So if you think about a use case of, let's say, low latency or policy-compliant trading for remote users, right? Generally, these applications, they are sitting in the exchange data centers that are providing the transactions for traders or end users transacting, different kind of trades, right, from the banking perspective. But before the trade is completed, right, it requires compliance from the bank risk and position policy perspective, right? And that requires transactions, right? So one is the connection part, and the other part is the time that is being taken into those transactions. So if you decentralize some of those transaction capabilities and bring it closer to the user through mobile edge computing and leverage those high bandwidth and ultra low latency capabilities from 5G, then you are going to have a whole lot of difference from the end user perspective. So one of the benefits will be faster trade execution, especially for mobile or remote traders. And there are capabilities in the network where you can actually fast track a specific application based on their business requirements. So if you have a bandwidth or pipe, that is connecting, in this case, for example, 5G, you actually carve out a dedicated bandwidth for certain application and, put that on a highway. Just think about it that, this particular ultra low latency application is going to be on the highway. So by enforcing trading policies at the mobile edge computing, instead of actually keeping them into the corporate data center, traders can place policy compliant trades on the lowest latency path to the exchange.
Mohammed, as I'm listening to you, and I'm going to come back to you in one sec, but I am curious because we are talking about really a tremendous increase in already a big data set. When I hear you talking about, Mohammed, the capability and the opportunity, and then of course the application that you're talking about is to do this with a great degree of speed or low latency. Sandy, one thing that I've from reading your research and following your work, you do have a position on metadata management and what all of this big data might mean and how we might organize it. Could you just kind of react to what Mohammed said in the construct of how you think about managing all this data?
Well, a lot of people ignore the metadata. We tend to operate only on the metadata. So, what we're seeing is a future where everything is encrypted except the metadata. And it turns out you can do AI, federated learning, fraud detection on the metadata perfectly fine. So we help some of the big financial firms do this, where they can't see some of the data. They're just transporting encrypted versions of the data. But there's still patterns. You can still recognize things. Let me just add one thing to what Mohammed said, because, a question is, do we really need all that low latency, all that bandwidth? And let me just point out something that's really interesting, which is that as you move towards this transaction medium, where this is really a medium for getting business done, for trading, for charges, for things like that, and it's all encrypted, you're lowering the cost of transactions among everything. So there's going to be a lot of middlemen that disappear in this sort of thing or get hurt. But one of the things you also do is you remove the main motivation for large corporations and uniform rules. So the traditional argument for why there are large corporations is low internal transaction costs. But Mohammed and Omar are making those transaction costs really, really low. Why do we need the sort of big corporations? Well, they could easily become more like collaboratives where you have lots of local things, which means the service becomes tuned to the local community and is managed by the large organizations. So it's separating out local things from global things. And what that does is, of course, give much better service locally. So instead of one size fits none, you can customize it and for every sort of community. But it changes the way you use bandwidth and latency also. Because now what you have to do is share metadata among all the people in the community or all the people locally, not necessarily with some big data center. Right? You might do control signals back to the data center, but you have a lot more bandwidth required. It's very dynamic bandwidth too. So you need a high capacity type of system for that. And we see this actually with management of mobile phones already. The way a lot of the updates of algorithms on your phone work are exactly this way. They're edge computing. They compute it locally. They send encrypted streams back home. Then that updates the learning algorithm, sends it back down to you. Your personal data never leaves your phone.
Yeah. Sandy, the vision you just painted is tremendous, and particularly as we think about this theme about including everyone, right? The globalization, but is important if you think about it at the community level. And the inclusiveness of it. But it does require some industrial strength computing, I have to say. And I don't know if I could actually explain it to myself, Umar. Maybe you can take a stab at helping sort of us react to the vision Sandy just painted and the potential capabilities.
Yep, absolutely. So first of all, it's really enlightening to see and hear the thoughts here. And I'll give you a different perspective, right? It's not a different perspective, but a perspective from somebody who needs to actually now build these applications, which will go to and build these use cases and solutions, which will go to the eventual consumers, right? And eventual customers. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. And then when we were thinking about it, we were really thinking about, okay, what are the key enablers that we can unpack that at the edge of the network that will actually trigger and inspire and accelerate that innovation cycle. So there are three triggers that that we think that would be very important. So number one is providing an ease of building edge applications. So it means that providing it in the same environment as the cloud. So it means the developers are using the same cloud infrastructure. They're using the same operational consistency, same APIs, same tools for automation, deployment, and security control. And that's something which is very important, as rightfully highlighted by Sandy as well. But what that means essentially is that the applications that are already built in the cloud today, they can be easily adapted to run at the edge with relatively lower and little re-architecture effort. And I think that's when you think really from somebody who needs to code, who needs to actually develop applications, that is a big enabler. Now, the second enabler is, now think about the network. So generally, and having worked in the telco industry all my life, it's a pretty scary thing, right? So there are a lot of like jargons, lot of like technical things that come in as well. So what we are trying to do is to abstract that peculiarity of the network from the developers, and then expose those network characteristics like latency, mobility, handovers, and all these and RAN characteristics in the form of consumable APIs for the builders. So that now what they can do is that they don't need to worry about where will I place my workload? How will I actually position it in Boston or in New York or others? So that's the heavy lifting that we are trying to enable it with the Amazon Cloud placement and auto scaling and all the rest of the stuff. And the third thing, which Sandy has already explained, and I think that is very important to understand, that there is a data load balancing challenge that we have. Not all of the data would be on the edge. Not all of the data can be in the cloud. And there's an interoperability that will happen. So applications really need to consume the services in the cloud as well as in the edge. So like, I'll give you an example of an AI-based application where the model training needs to be done in the cloud because it's a heavy resource consuming task and it can be done in an efficient and effective manner. And the decision making that the inference can be done at the edge of the network. So these are the three big enablers. Now let's talk about what is it really unpacking, right? What is it? What are the use cases that it is bringing? And what we are observing is that there are some new and innovative use cases that are being brought to the market. And there are some which we call them as horizontal use cases, like video analytics at the edge. That has very broader implementation across all the segments, including the financial segment, including the healthcare, right? One example in healthcare that I can give and that AWS and Verizon have collectively, jointly brought to the market is assisting the real-time diagnostics in the healthcare through inference, right? And that is something which is very tangible, especially in today's world. And then there are very vertical industry specific use cases that we are seeing as well, especially like mobile cloud gaming and the high quality 4K, 8K video content creation, and then distribution over the 5G edge as well. So I think that's how I will kind of unpack it from really the builder's perspective.
Yeah, Umar, thank you. We've just gotten a question from the audience, which I think you answered in that statement as well as Sandy did, and I want to give Mohammed a chance. You know, there is this question about sort of what other new things can you do with ubiquitous 5G and edge computing, you know, specifically about financial services. Mohammed, I don't know if you want to pick up on where Sandy was thinking, and then Umar's very tangible example of the use of it for MEC for the builders. Mohammed, anything from your side?
Yeah, so I mean, it ties up, and by the way, thank you, Sandy and Umar, for tying up the story of how the MEC and 5G, they are going to bring these efficiencies for the services that can be consumed by the end users in a very helpful way. So yes, I mean, think about multiple services being combined and then without actually users having to go to individual providers, be able to consume it from single pane of glass. So think about B2B to C, and an example can be given for the firm, right? That is one of the buy now, pay later, right? So they have something like they provide the credit to the e-commerce provider or retail or other shoppers, right? But they are a banking service. So if an end user, if they are going to approach to end users, chances are that end user may not separately, go with that service. But when it is an ingredient of the e-commerce application, then it's going to be consumed very efficiently. Now, think from the implementation perspective, because everything is being powered by technology infrastructure, and the connectivity and the security has to be around it. So if these two providers are having, these applications at separate places, that will require, processing in a different way at different places, and then connectivity, it might add latency, and it may eventually lead to bad experiences. So one thing is innovating the product, but at the same time thinking about, how these innovation in products and services are going to be combined, and then combined with a very good end user experience. So some thought around that. If you combine those, when application developers are sitting with other application developers, and they are combining the capabilities and distributing the intelligence in the far cloud and in the edges, so it's going to optimize the processing and the connectivity and the metadata stuff.
Yeah, Mohammed, thank you. It strikes me as you're going through that description, we do need to circle back to a subtle point Sandy made earlier in the conversation, work on GDPR and what it means with the idea of personal data out on the cloud. And out on the edge. Sandy, do you want to, just as we wind down our discussion in the final few minutes, kind of take us through sort of, what your thought was that were there, the construct of what it means to, the community level and even more broadly, if you want, how we think about the challenge of data privacy.
Yeah, so the top level is, data has become a core means of production, like money, like labor. And if it's a core means of production, then what do? Well, there has to be ownership, and it has to be clear. Data is different than money because it's co-created, it's not fungible, it expires. So it needs some different rules. But just like money, it's complicated. And poor humans can't figure out what they should do with it, right? And where to get the right value. And as a consequence, the data is frozen either, in my device or in a very few big collectors. What happened with money, what happened with labor, is you've got community organizations that represented citizens. They didn't take the money from the citizens. They would hold it and invest them. And we're beginning to see the same thing here, where you're getting data banks, just like you have money banks or cooperative credit unions, that help people use their data. And so when you want to spin up a new service, you don't talk to the people directly, you talk to their bank. Just like when you want to bring in large amounts of capital, you talk to the bank, you don't go typically to individual depositors. And this is something that is sort of core to the follow-on to GDPR. It's in the California law. And so what that does is that means that the burden of, understanding what to do with your data, the trust that you have with a customer moves to these banks or fiduciaries, which represent you in some way, right? So it makes it easier for them to allow corporations to have insights about the customers because they're very sophisticated. And for instance, in Southeast Asia, Temasek has a company they spun up called DSpark, which does this for telco data and many other types of data, so that the telco doesn't besmirch itself by selling data or even insights. What it does is it lets DSpark take requests and answer them for advertisers, for planners, for small businesses. And if you analyze what that does as an ecology, it turns out that that frees up data to make it much more liquid. It makes price discovery possible. It, of course, makes the whole world a lot more efficient because now there's a lot more data out there to make things happen. And it's just sort of a different way of thinking about the whole process. And I'm going to slip it in here. So I have a new book. It's free. It's online, MIT Press, called Building a New Economy, Data as Capital. But it's free. So I'm not just like, I'm not trying to make myself rich here. But it has elements of this and also what the sort of software architecture is to do it.
Yeah, and Sandy, I love that you brought that perspective in because we've contemplated both in our prep calls and more broadly with Mohammed and Umar that the user experience is evolving, and I think I heard you say as we think about the use of data and personal data and how it gets extracted, really. With these combined capabilities, moving into a situation where we do have a much more cohesive and seamless user experience. And Mohammed, I don't know if you want to bring into bear any of the learnings, or Umar too, that you all have had working with this technology, as Sandy said, using that data, those stores of data in the banks for an evolving user experience.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, go ahead, Umar. Go ahead, please.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I wanted to say that, Sandy touched base on a couple of very good things like AI, AR, VR, right? And then Internet of Things, imagine from the perspective of all kinds of devices that are being proliferated right now among the users. And be able to, so the expectation from the end user would be like, hey, I should be able to execute my business from any device, from anywhere, and on any network, right? But with that, again, experience, all sales from the business perspective, they include experiences, right? So how are we going to make sure that those experiences that the users are imagining or expecting, they are provided in a way that is seamless, right? So, with the capabilities that 5G and mobile edge computing and the cloud bring it together, and then all the services stack, around that, like security and privacy, there has been a lot of talk about GDPR and California law, right? So be able to, have those security and privacy control and concerns addressed at the edges and in the network instead of the devices, I think is going to provide a very, reliable and secure experience to the end user. Umar, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, definitely. I'll a couple of things and observations. But before I do that, thank you, Sandy, for sharing it. Now I've got my nighttime read for the next month or so. Hopefully, I'll be able to finish it earlier. Thank you so much for that. Actually, I would like to give you guys some trends and some examples, and I think that would be good, especially for the fintech community who is listening, that okay, what is really happening in other segments as well. So as I think there are some very exciting technologies that are emerging with the availability of cloud services within, let's call it sub 20 millisecond of latency. It can go to a single digit as well, right? Across, of course, the 5G network. And I would mention 4 of them. 3 are examples and 1 is a call to action, to be honest. So the first one is robotics. And in the robotics, like what we are really seeing is that these robots, they require on-device compute power and very heavy compute power. And in the environments where many such robots are working like an assembly line, like there is a problem with the synchronization among different robots, in addition to, of course, like the high cost of the robots as well. So this operation and synchronization at the assembly line, that is being handled at the network edge with the help of like high-powered GPUs that creates the cost and performance deficiencies as well. And it really opens up a lot of new use cases in very different segments as well. So I think that's a trend that we should definitely look forward to and keep an eye on. The second thing that observing is the drones. So now we've heard that like, okay, drones are being used for the parcel delivery across the network and stuff. Perfect. However, I was actually thinking what Sandy was brought up around the security elements of it. So we actually have some ISVs and some developers who are building applications where actually 5G Edge is playing an important role in the airspace security from like the drones, but like unlawful drones and their incursion that's keeping the airspace safe. So you can think of like how the edge cloud really opens up these opportunities, right? And the third thing is this whole mixed reality, the AR, VR streaming that requires low latencies, but to the level of like motion to photon latency, right? In order for the end user to have an experience, real life experience. So with this low latency provision, we are seeing more of a mixed reality streaming applications. And that again goes back to that very high power required, like GPUs, which are required, right? And very, very expensive if you actually put everything in the headset as well, right? So being able to do this server-side compositing and rendering, it eliminates the need for client-side rendering of the headset. This is really resulting into a lot of efficiencies. So, and we are seeing it in some of the segments like 3D object modeling, 3D CAD design, engineering, which is pretty cool as well. And the last thing, which is really a call for action, is I personally think that the high frequency trading that would require, because that is something which requires time sensitive financial transactions and order processing. And that's really a call for action for the fintech developer community to look into it and build some use cases that can solve these challenges in the HFT area as well. So these were like some of the thought process and some of observations, I would rather say.
Yeah. And Umar, I appreciate it because I think what you did was we didn't get a lot to the audience questions, but I will say that the three of you have reminded us that the intersection of technology with smart data use brings us to a system where I believe financial services in the future, with the three of you and your vision and others, is going to be fairer, it's going to be safer, and it's going to be more expansive. And I can't thank all of you enough for bringing these thoughts to us, both the technical aspects and then the vision and really actually what's happening in reality to use these technologies. I know that we didn't get to the audience questions as much. If anyone wants to get in touch with these individuals, reach out to us at the Sandbox at info@fintechsandbox.org. We'll make sure that everybody's connected. But thank you all for bringing to a close another amazing week of FinTech Talks powered by Fintech Sandbox, and these thoughts that make us dream bigger dreams and know that we can underpin them with technology. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye.